Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, August 26th, 2025, episode 474, and we're going to talk about Machiavelli, diplomacy, Game of Thrones. Okay, so I'm a late to the party. I get it. I didn't watch Game of Thrones until I could just binge watch it. Anyway, enough. You know what I mean by that, right? So you can sit there and wait every week for the new episode to come out, or you can wait for all of them to come out and you just sit there and watch it. Whenever I do something like that, I am very careful not to listen to anyone else when it comes to talking about that series. And the people around me really weren't interested in having that kind of conversation with me, so it was all good. My wife at one point had bought the book and you started reading the book, but in the first 30 pages, I don't know, there was all this like incest and like just a lot of sex with minors. And it was just I was like, okay, I'm not gonna read this. And I don't know, call me old fashioned, but it just if I can avoid having to read that stuff, then all the better for me. Anyway, so, but what made me think about it, obviously, of Machiavelli was, of course, finishing my second view through Game of Thrones. So the first time it was just sort of watching it, trying to figure out what the heck is going on, learning all the names. And so we waited a few years and then we watched it again. Uh, and we were able to pick up so much more the second time around. And I just thought that there were so many themes of Machiavelli in it. A student had said to me before that Game of Thrones was written with Machiavelli as a guide, sort of as inspiration for some of the plot lines. And yeah, there it was. It was kind of very interesting. But also, I saw that one of the network news stations had an hour-long interview with Sergei Lavrov, one of the Russian officials, which, what, really? It took you 4 years to talk to someone who is Russian? And if we think in terms of the Trump first term, where they were talking about the Russian collusion and all that, not a single time did they talk to anyone from Russia, which is insane, right? And it's surprising that more people in America did not say something about it. I mentioned it all the time in class. Like if we're demonizing so much, how about talking to them and getting their side of the story? And they thought that was kind of interesting. They still hated Russia, but they thought that it was interesting that they refused to interview anyone or even seek out an interview. Tucker Carlson goes and talks with Putin. Trump talks with Putin. And finally, they say, fine, okay, we'll interview them so we can put our own spin on it. And I think that a lot of US media personalities, and we know they're all bots, right? They just read a script. They probably thought that Russian diplomats would be as easy to fluster as American politicians, as the vast majority of American politicians, like Ted Cruz. But no, it didn't go down like that. What you saw was a very firm line being held. And my hope is that, and I know that this is a vain hope, but for Americans to see what real diplomacy is supposed to look like, very even toned, no drama, no, we got to kill them all kind of rhetoric, like out of Lindsey Graham and things like and people like that. And so, just to get everyone to realize you guys are the bottom of the barrel. The way your conversations are, the way that you protest, the way that you try to, get something done politically, it's very lowbrow. It's very low intellect, low IQ level of discussion. And the fact that people think that it's intelligent or that you had a gotcha moment with pulling stunts like that, it just really it's not a good look for America. And I've talked about this before, how Asians in general will look at America, right, and Americans and see just how uneducated and how their arguments and discussions lack any kind of subtlety, nuance, you know, broader perspective, even wide base of knowledge. The fact that it's completely absent at times is mind-boggling to so many other people. Like, how did you get so rich being so dumb? You know, that was something that I heard all the time. Anyway, coming back to Machiavelli, I talked about him in episode 60. That was a while ago. You may not want to go back that far. And plus, I think I was still doing hour-long episodes. So the main concern for Machiavelli was stability and the happiness of the people. Happiness of the people was crucial, right? And keep in mind, in those days, because government is so expensive and you can't just print money, you had to be really careful. The people always outnumbered, uh, the power of the state, the number of people who are associated with the government. And because a standing army is so expensive, you couldn't have a standing army. And so you would have a small personal guard. But if the people ever rose up, they would not be able to defend the king. So Machiavelli, channeling a little bit of Sun Tzu, he says that you have to not only, when you're making policy, making decisions, you have to look at the immediate problem, but also look ahead to the consequences of, the choices and the policies that you commit to today, and then look to the future. Varys was a spy master, and his main concern was the good of the kingdom. And I thought that was really interesting because Machiavelli's The Prince is about a book about what an advisor should say to a prince, to a ruler, right? So it says prince, but really it means king, right? Sovereign, whoever is ruling that area. And so I got the feeling after reading and teaching Machiavelli for a while is that Machiavelli is trying to be an advisor so that the ruler rules well, right? Because he was poor, he was a bastard, right? So he was part of the underclass. And so he knows what it's like. Life is rough when a ruler is not good. And so he puts this out there and saying, look, I can be a good advisor. Please hire me to be one of the advisors. And of course, so then he's basically laying it all out there. And so Varys, who is a spy master in the Game of Thrones, that's what he says throughout the whole series, that all he cares about is not loyalty to the king, but loyalty to the realm. In other words, for the people. He is trying to advise rulers so that they are good for the people, right? So that there's justice for the people, justice for people like him. And so I really like that because that's what I think he's the Machiavelli, right? He's trying to do his best. Either him or Tyrion plays the role of or the voice of Machiavelli. And so we can see that in the Game of Thrones, advisors take a very prominent role. I looked up the cast, and Tyrion, who is played by I don't know what his real name is, but the guy who plays Tyrion the dwarf, he is what appeared in the most number of episodes of Game of Thrones. I think, in fact, he's in every single episode, he's there. And so one might make the argument that he's the most important character, he's the most prominent character, and he's an advisor. Uh, and so the Game of Thrones, yes, is about the thrones, but it's also, more importantly, are the advisors to the ruler. Um, but of course, Tyrion is bright, he's really smart, but it's really hard to be honest and say what needs to be said because rulers can react badly to honest advice. And so and plus also, you have to consider the vehicle, right? And so Tyrion was not a respectable person. He becomes respectable, but at first, I mean, who can take him seriously? He's waking up in pig dung and whatnot. And so it's kind of, he's probably smelled bad. So how can this person be intelligent in any way? But what you see towards the end of the miniseries is that no matter the advice, no matter how good the advice is, you still have to depend on the personality and the character of the ruler, right? So you have good advice, but if the person who's seizing power is not a good person, it doesn't matter. Right. And so you see different aspects of advice. You see spiritual guidance, you see practical guidance, right? And so you see this interplay of advice. I'm a really anti-plot spoiler kind of person, so I'm not going to say anything directly about Game of Thrones, but if you have watched it and you know the series, you're a big fan or whatever, then when I give examples, you'll recognize them, right? So, uh, so that's all. That's enough. That's all I'll say. And maybe, hopefully, well, all right. Disclaimer: there's a lot of nudity in there. It's pretty crazy. I joked around with my wife. I was like, I think is this a requirement that if you're on the show, you got to have a couple nude scenes? I don't know. If you're not into that thing, don't watch it. It's also very bloody and gory. At this point in life, I really don't care. But anyway, so let's see, where was I? Oh, so he gives examples, especially in chapter 3, of what happens when advice is not followed, right? You lose power. And so the goal is for the ruler to not only maintain power and be stable, but in such a way that it benefits all of the people. Right. And so when he goes through the advice that he would give in certain situations, it's a little bit like game theory, right? So you need a little bit of wisdom and you're relying on the predictability of human nature, right? How well do you know that person? This is what probably that person will do. And so this is how you should prepare or respond. But at the same time, there's a lot that's going on, right? It's a little bit more complex in real life. People are not as predictable as they might be, and uh, and sometimes they'll exercise a choice that you couldn't see coming, and it changes everything, right? And you can see that in certain points in Game of Thrones where uh, one critical execution or one critical choice or decision changes the outcome, right? It could have been different, but no, you decided to do it this way. And so now the outcome is not going to be what you hoped it would be. When you take over in chapter 5, he talks about taking over new land, right? And so you're trying to seize power of the seven realms, right? The seven kingdoms, whatever they're calling it. Well, there are three ways you can do it. You can lay waste and start all over. In other words, kill everyone there and then repopulate, right? We saw that. You can go and live there. We saw that as well. And or you can just leave them be, right? So you say, okay, pay me tribute every year. Otherwise, you can keep your rulers, just give me and keep all your laws and customs. Just every year, you got to give me 10% of your revenue, right? Something like that. And obviously, the third choice is the best option. However, people generally want direct control. They want that power. And so they're going to choose one or the other. Chapter 8 talks about naked violence and well-used cruelty. So these are they're both violent and they're both involve a lot of killing. But naked violence is you do the violence, uh, someone's your enemy, you got to get rid of them. And so it's out in the open, right? So the violence is there. Everyone's, oh yeah, yeah, you killed that person. So well-used cruelty would uh, basically either weaponize the law or create a reason to kill that person, right? Treason would be a good and often used excuse to execute someone, right? So political executions, well, you accuse them of treason. Oh, they were trying to take the throne from me, so they have to die. Disobeying orders, you have to die, right? So treason is the best reason. But at the same time, sometimes you have to avoid violence to keep the peace, which never seemed to be the option in Game of Thrones, right? It was always violence. Violence is going to be the option. And if you do start killing people, you have to do it all at once. And we saw that happen, right? All the enemies of someone was gathered in this one place, and then they just blew it up, right? And killing all of the enemies all at once. And then now you can turn around. Now that all opposition is out of the way, you can just simply shower blessings on everyone in the city. And then in chapter 8, he continues on this whole idea of violence that if you come to power through a massacre, just a naked violence, right? So we saw one, right, where you kill everyone all at once and it seems very righteous that you did it, right? People understand that you did it. Or you can just simply just kill lots of people, have a massacre. So when you massacre people, you have the power, but there's no glory for you. People won't remember you fondly. Plus, you set yourself up for retaliation, right? Obviously, the person who massacred all these other people just for power, he's immoral. And so a lot of other people will start plotting to kill you. Otherwise, you might be next. Chapter 17 talks about the question of being loved or feared. And we saw that towards the end of the miniseries, right, in season 8, right? So should I have the people try to love me, or should I have the people fear me? And so Machiavelli himself says, always go with fear. Fear is what you want. However, do not let it go to hatred, right? There's a difference. Hate it, to be hated is different from feared, right? Because if you hate someone, you're not afraid of the enemy, excuse me, you're not afraid of them any longer, right? Now, most people would say, well, I want to be loved by the people. Yet love is okay, but people are inconstant, right? They will change on a dime, right? They love you today, but now there's no food in the stores. They hate you tomorrow, right? So this is the thing. So you don't want love. Love is nice. It's fine. If they love you, great. But you want fear. You want fear from the people. They won't step out of line with you. They will do what you say. They will submit to your rules, but you can't push them too far because if you do, you become hated. Hatred breeds rebellion and people start plotting against you. And we saw that in the miniseries as well. Chapter 18 talks about integrity. Integrity is nice, being honest, keeping your promises, but you can't keep a promise if it works against your favor. And we saw that too, people violating their promise, people trying to keep their promise. We saw that all throughout the series. And so what he says is you have to be wise as foxes, but savage like lions, right? You need to have both. It's not one or the other. You need to have both. So you need to be able to kill and murder people when necessary, but when it's absolutely necessary. So you have to be extremely wise as to when you exercise that option. In chapter 18, he also says, you know, it's okay to lie to the people because people are simple-minded and they want to be deceived. They want you to lie to them, say everything is going to be all right because they don't want to suffer. And so as long as they don't suffer directly, they'll believe you. They'll believe all the lies. Yeah, we're going to grow ourselves out of the recession, right? You know, people love hearing that. Oh, I don't have to do anything. You're going to solve the problem for me. That's great, right? You don't even question it. You don't challenge it. You don't remember all the other times that they promised the same exact thing and failed, right? This time is different. This time they're actually going to do it. And so people will believe the biggest liar who has the appearance of having positive qualities. This is why controlling the mass media is so important. You get to control the narrative. You get to control every single image that is put out for public consumption. Obama was huge on this, right? He handpicked photo ops and photographers, and they were carefully crafted so that it creates an image that maybe he actually does have all of these positive qualities that he claims to have, right? So very, very important. And then finally, in chapter 21, he talks about great undertakings for reputation, right? So you do big things, uh, public things to garner the love of the people. It can diffuse a lot of hate, uh, and people just say, "Oh, wow, he was a great person," because they can't see what you're doing behind closed doors. And we saw that as well, right? Feeding all of the people. They're starving, they're hungry, they're going to have a revolution, and all of a sudden someone comes in, makes it seem like they have compassion for the poor, gives food out, and everyone loves that person, right? So you make these grand gestures, even though they disgust you, right? You realize that this is so necessary to get public opinion to go your way. And so, you train yourself to walk through poop and pee, and it's okay, right? Um, Now, if you are familiar with the Game of Thrones, as I said, then you know what I was talking about, what events I was talking about, right? Because I did it on purpose. I deliberately picked out those sections of Machiavelli, which I thought were clearly represented in the series, and that not even chronologically, right? So I just went through the book and where it appears in the miniseries, of course, depends. Um, Now, yeah, there's a lot of overlap with Game of Thrones, but it's also a way for people today to see what the government is doing to us because they are actually following the Machiavelli playbook, right? Much of the cruelty of the past had been exported, right? Most of it, not all of it, but most of it. And because of modern social media, it's harder and harder to hide. So regime change is like common knowledge now, right? And that is US and the CIA going into a country and undermining it, destabilizing it so that another person can come to power. America's done it countless times, so many times, right? Whereas for us, what we get in the news is, oh, this person was evil, and that's why the people rose up and took him out. And it's still going on today. They tried it in Iran and Russia most recently, and Ukraine was probably the most recent successful regime change. So support of other countries who are engaging in naked violence, yeah, that does not go well. And so not only Israel and Ukraine are engaging in naked violence, but the United States is supporting these countries. And in fact, all of their money and military hardware nearly all of it comes from the United States. People in America today focus only on what's being said, and they're not thinking about long-term consequences, and that's really, really bad. In other words, they're into the game of politics in America. Um, so, but keep in mind, we all play politics all the time in our lives. But generally, the politics that we engage in is personal. And so the scope of the influence of our politicking is very small, right? It affects our family, maybe some of our friends, but the politics that generally we engage most in is family politics, right? And you can compare that with the government, where they do all this stuff and we feel it all the time. Now, on the family level, you feel the consequences almost immediately. And the government, they just don't care. They just print more money and paper over or cover all of the problems that they've created. They do it with money. Uh, so what another takeaway too, when we look at the US government, is that violence should only be used when absolutely necessary, and that would be in defense, national defense. And we don't have national defense anymore, we have national offense. Or the Department of War, that's what it used to be called, and then they changed it to Department of Defense. But it's war still, right? Fundamentally, that's all they do is wage war. Um, people in the US government are vying for power. They're jockeying for power, but they do it in such a way that they're losing it all, right? Just basically Machiavelli is it would say that they are making all the wrong decisions. Where are their advisors, right? Or are there other people who are actually in control of the country? So it doesn't matter who the president is. Although, unfortunately, there are a lot of policies that Trump is pushing that we have to live under. Most recently is trying to pack the the board of the Federal Reserve. But keep in mind that the people always outnumber the government and those associated with it. Even with when it comes to the military, there are a lot of veterans, probably more veterans in society than active military, right? And since the ammunition of a lot of the state-of-the-art weapons of the United States, non-nuclear, uh, are almost all used up, they can't actually defend politicians in Washington, D.C. for very long, right? And if the government keeps pursuing these asinine policies, then there will be eventually a pushback against all of this government profligacy, right? All the wasteful, luxurious, over-the-top spending that they do. Anyway, so that's a trip down Machiavelli Lane as it relates to Game of Thrones. Hopefully, fans of the series would appreciate this take. But also, if you live in the United States, hopefully you'll be able to also appreciate how you can easily apply it to politics in the United States today. That's it. I'll talk to you next time.